Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist, and this may be one of the most important messages you hear from me this year, if not ever, because what I want to talk about today is a growing trend, not only with one particular headline that I'm going to talk about, but around the world for more and more countries to use and abuse their citizens, to raise taxes on their citizens around the world, and to devalue the citizenship you have now. And I'm going to talk about some trends that I see coming in the international tax field, trends that are going to make it more and more difficult for you to move your business and move yourself overseas to legally reduce your tax. I'm going to talk about some trends that I've been talking about for years, about how if you're a Western citizen, I believe that your time of maintaining that citizenship and paying zero tax may be in jeopardy. And these are things that I've been talking about for a long time. Let's get to the headline and go from there. So I came across an article from one of the big think tanks in Canada. Now, this article was not written by a think tank philosopher. It was actually written by a sitting member of Canadian Parliament who's part of the majority party in Canada, named Chandra Arya. And the headline says, Canada, it's very simple, Canada needs to start taxing Canadians who live abroad. He says the case for citizenship-based taxation has been building for years, but with huge budget deficits to come, fairer taxation is all the more needed. Now, we've been talking almost from the beginning of Nomad Capitalist when I was writing articles for fun. I just sold my businesses and I was studying this stuff. And I said that the word that their politicians are going to use, I said two things actually. I said they're going to use the backdoor methods. This may actually be more aggressive than the backdoor methods, but generally they're going to use backdoor methods. And I said, number two, they're going to use the word fair. And the article basically, there's no need to go through this long prattling article, but basically this sitting member of Parliament, the House of Commons, I think, in Canada. I don't follow Canadian politics because I do have melatonin. But the article says it's time for Canada to adopt citizenship-based taxation. And he goes on and he basically, the first couple paragraphs are about just complaining about the fact that 3 million Canadians at the time of the coronavirus outbreak were overseas, either as tourists or as long-term expats. And he specifically mentions buzzwords such as Hong Kong, the Middle East, etc. And it's this long kind of prattling on thing about how Canadians live overseas. How dare they, right? And then he gets into complaining about how Canadian tax obligations are only based on residence. And we've talked about this. The United States is effectively the only country. South Africa is starting to hone in with them. But for the longest time, the United States has been effectively the only country that taxes its citizens on their worldwide income. It does not mean if you're an American that you can't legally go overseas and save money, but it means you're going to have to still file a tax return with the IRS. And it means that you're probably going to have a more difficult time of it. It's something that we help people work through because it's not always easy. If you're a Canadian, if you're British, if you're Australian, if you're German, you can leave the country, you can become a non-resident. Now, different Western countries have made that much more difficult if you want to do things like keep your home, or if your wife wants to stay behind, or if your kids want to stay behind, or a number of other things. They've made it more difficult to leave, especially in the English-speaking countries. But if you can, get through the list of things that you need to do, you can become a non-resident, and then you can remain a Canadian citizen, British citizen, what have you, and you can live your life with that great travel document, being well respected wherever it is that you may need to go, and be able to go back to Canada whenever you want, all while living in a place where you choose your tax rate. You can live in Hong Kong, as he says, low tax place. You can live in Dubai and pay nothing. So it's very easy to do tax planning once you extricate yourself from Canada. And so this article is saying because of budget deficits and because of increased globalization, that should not be allowed. Now, I've been telling you this for years. I've been saying you will see more countries follow the United States lead. And I did say at one point, I said Canada and Australia are probably the two prime targets for me. South Africa is less on our radar. We do work with folks from South Africa, but South Africa has been less on my radar. I can't say, having been there, that I'm surprised. But in terms of the developed countries, I always thought that Canada, being next to the US and often adopting a lot of the things that the US does, might be next on the hit list. Australia could be another one. I do think that maybe the UK has less of a risk of this, but who knows what could happen. I don't think that'll happen in the near future. But basically, here's what the guy who's in Parliament is saying. He's saying that if you're Canadian, you have the access to the same services if you're overseas than if you live in the country. Obviously not true. You're not driving on the road, sending your kids to the schools, going to the doctor. You're not using any of those services. You may not have used them if you're a wealthy person. You may not have used them when you're in Canada. You drive on the roads, but are you using the healthcare system, or are you going somewhere and getting private healthcare, right? And so basically he's using all the buzzwords that I've always said would be used to pick on what he calls high net worth individuals who establish tax residence abroad in order to save on income taxes. What he's doing is making the case that no matter where you're born, you are a slave to that place for the rest of your life because at one time you took advantage of services. And I believe this is where you're going to see a lot of Western countries going. For years, I've worked with people. We talk about second passports. I don't push second passports on people. If you tell me on a scale of 1 to 10, your need and want for a second passport is a 1, we move on. Maybe I give you a few advisory items, but I'm not in the business of telling people to get things that they don't need. I want you to be educated, and we've talked about why you should get a second passport here on this channel. This is one of the reasons. It's what's called citizenship insurance, that when Chandra Arya comes out and writes an article as a member of the government in power saying we got to start taxing people who don't even live here, that you will have the option to extricate yourself from that system. But what people have been telling me is, yeah, I hear you, Andrew. I hear you saying that there's this kind of phantom risk out there that my country could tax me. But, I'm not American. I don't need a passport. Let's just move on. And I've said, okay, fine. There have been people in the United States who I've said, hey, if you have 3 other passports, maybe you want to consider renouncing your U.S. citizenship. What if they make the tax code more difficult and more laborious? Turns out, people didn't listen to me, and then it became more difficult, more laborious for Americans overseas. This is the trend, okay? There are people out there, and I talked about this, I talked about my thoughts on the tax fairness for Americans overseas, where there are people out there who are crusading for the U.S. to change its system. The U.S. is not going to change its system. There is no political benefit to any politician to come out and say, let's stop taxing people who live overseas, because the body politic, the average Joe who votes, thinks that everyone who lives overseas is a rich fat cat who's stealing, who has some offshore account, who is taking advantage of the system. I don't know what system they're taking advantage of. I don't know why having a Swiss bank account when you live in Switzerland is so nefarious, but let's face it. The average person doesn't travel. They don't follow the news other than the propaganda that the basic propaganda that they're fed. They don't really pay attention in any meaningful way. They're too busy living mediocre lives to really know any different or to care. And so they just follow what they see on TV or in the movies about this kind of stuff. And so when a politician who wants to take advantage to correct his mistakes, his budget deficits, his record debts, comes out and says, we need new piles of money, they say, sounds good to us, go and tax those rich guys, because what's increasingly become a trend in the West is, we need higher taxes, just not for me. I grew up in the United States, and I've seen this increasingly in all the elections that I followed, where every year it's, we're going to give you a tax cut and make that guy pay for it. That's the way it is. That is the way that it has been. And so here's what I think the trends are going to be. I see 3 trends coming up, short, medium, and long term when it comes to international tax planning. Number 1, politicians are not going to let crises go to waste. They're going to use their rampant spending, their stimulus, their bailout money. They're going to use that as an excuse to raise taxes, and they're going to have to, quite frankly. The economics are going to require it. So short term, if you live in the West, if you live in the United States, Canada, all these countries that are handing out money, you're going to see higher taxes. It's politically the way that the West is going. So staying in your country, you're going to pay more. Now, you can say, hey, I'm going to call Nomad Capitalist. I'm going to figure out my legal strategy to remove myself from my country. I'm going to go overseas and pay 0 or 5 or 10%. And problem solved, right? Great. Midterm, what I do see is more countries, perhaps Canada, perhaps others, implementing some kind of citizenship-based taxation that the United States has. Now, I've said that some of them, or perhaps all of them, will do it through some kind of backdoor method. It seems South Africa is kind of taking a backdoor method to it. They're not really clear on where they're trying to go. It's been a bit confusing. But they may not say you've got to pay. What they may say is, hey, if you live in a tax treaty country like France, we'll leave you alone. If you live in Dubai, all bets are off. Who knows what they'll do? But they could certainly, come up with some interesting ways to go about it. I think in the midterm, you will see more countries adopting some form of that. Midterm could be 5, 7, maybe even 10 years. In the long term, what I think you'll see is some of the safe havens that you go to now will have to impose some kind of tax. What I've been telling you for a while now is onshore is the new offshore. Going to some far-flung, tiny little speck island in the Caribbean or the South Pacific, it can work for now, and it may be good for part of your strategy. I'm not saying don't use those countries at all, but I'm saying to base your entire strategy around going and living in one of those countries because they don't have tax. I do think eventually, much like what happened with Andorra being bullied by the EU, its neighbors, France and Spain, into having an income tax, I think you'll see other countries being bullied into having an income tax. The countries like the UAE that have some kind of stability and have some kind of heft to them will perhaps last longer, which is why I think those places are worth considering, the UAE being just one of many examples. I think it's a possibility that eventually even the UAE will just get around to saying, you know what, everyone's going to pay 5%. Certainly better than what could be 40, 50, 60, 70% in some Western countries. If you look back into the middle of the last century, the Beatles, for example, were protesting rates that were in the 90s. In the United States, John F. Kennedy, I believe, came in. Rates were 91% at the top. These are marginal rates. But who knows what you go back to? There is a calling. People are saying billionaires should not exist, but the average person doesn't really know the difference between a billionaire that they believe is the 1% and a guy who makes 100 grand or 200 grand who's in the top couple percent of income earners. I don't know that the average person differentiates. What I know is people are angry, and people like Chandra Arya are going to stoke that. What does that mean for you? I've been saying it for a long time. You need citizenship insurance. And what fascinates me is when I talk to folks and when I work with folks who are from countries in Eastern Europe and Latin America, and to a lesser extent in Asia, they've seen it happen. They've seen the reason why they need insurance. I was just talking to a guy the other day. He's a European guy. He's seen stuff happen in his country early in his life, and his parents certainly remember it. He said, I want as many passports as I can get my hands on. And meanwhile, I've talked to folks from Canada and from the UK and from Australia who are very nice people, and we help them out, and it's all very lovely. And I'm not here to judge, but I can sometimes look at it and say, you guys don't know what adversity looks like. You guys don't know how bad it can get. And I think that while paying higher tax rates may not be the same as a war ripping through your country, if you're a high income earner, if you're the 7 or 8 figure entrepreneur that we talk to, if you make $1 million a year, you're going to have a dramatic impact on your ability to create wealth, leave a legacy, give, build your business if your tax rates go up to the rates that some of these guys want to raise them to. And so you're going to want an escape hatch. But the next thing is the politicians are going to close off the escape hatch. It's like, the police. They put a perimeter around the property, and then they have a perimeter around that. You want to make sure that the criminal doesn't get out. And that's how people view you. If you don't think giving 60% of your money to the government is reasonable, if you think, hey, I'm making $1 million, I'm giving you 600 grand, that more than pays for the services that I use, especially when so many people pay nothing or $1,000, $2,000, why am I paying $600,000? You will be viewed by people as a criminal for not paying, it's right here in the headline, your fair share. Even now, if you don't live in the country, you have to pay your fair share. Now, this is not a law yet, but here's the thing. Citizenship insurance. Listen, no one likes buying insurance. I just paid the other day, I got a bill for my home in Malaysia, I got a bill from the condominium. You got to pay the fire insurance bill. Now, would I rather not pay for fire insurance? That was only like $80 or something. But yeah, sure, I'd rather not pay for fire insurance. I could spend that $80 on something else. Until the house burns down. Until some guy in the building, leaves something on the stove and nobody cares and it just spreads through the whole building and now the whole building is destroyed. Yeah, I wish I would have paid the $80. If you have an income and you are cash flowing money right now, you need to set aside part of that money and go out and at least work on some kind of second passport. You don't need to necessarily rush and get a citizenship by investment passport if you can't afford it. There are ways where you can pay legal fees, maybe you make a small investment in the country, you hire someone, maybe you buy a second home. There are things that you should be probably doing anyway that can help you get on the track to a second passport, if not immediately. I'm not saying that you need this 3 months from now, but I'm saying you want to get an insurance policy in place. And I know that, you'd rather be spending that money on shoes or a nice car or a vacation or whatever else, and you're welcome to do that. But when I see people who are in the ruling party coming out and saying, here's what we want to do, we want to tax everyone and there's no way for you to escape, you at least need a second passport. And by the way, if you're Canadian, if you're American, if you're whatever, what I find sometimes is those folks are the ones who want or insist on really top tier passports because they don't want to sacrifice prestige or travel opportunities, right? Going from being Canadian to being Armenian or Bosnian, doesn't seem so appealing. So all the more reason that you need to get started earlier if you want to get that top tier, that tier A passport under your belt. It might take you 5 years to do it, but at least in the midterm you'll have that, so you'll have another option. Prices of citizenships generally, if they either stay the same or they go up, programs sometimes close. And again, if you want to get your ideal options, if you want to be in control, that's the best way to do this. Take some money. Now, if you have $10 million, take 1% of your net worth, just go and get a citizenship by investment. I have a gentleman right now, he's built a $20 million net worth. We're just doing citizenship by investment. He doesn't want to wait. He doesn't want to mess around. He just wants it done. Right? He doesn't want to be traveling to places every year or messing around with apartments. He just wants pay, go. So it's certainly up to you. If you're making $500,000 a year, $100,000 plus fees may be too much. There may be something else where you can go and pay $10,000 or $15,000 in legal fees, get on track, come back and collect your passport 3 years later, that kind of thing. But what I know is now more than ever, you need citizenship insurance. You may never use it, right? I just paid for fire insurance. I don't think my building will ever burn down. I don't think my apartment will ever burn down. I hope it doesn't. And you know what? The best thing that can happen to me was I wasted the $80. In 10 years from now, I'll have wasted $800. And the best thing will be my apartment didn't burn down. But it's a good risk transfer every year to send $80 to make sure that if the building does burn down, I've got some protection. The same thing happens with citizenship. This proposal may never take place, but I don't think if you're Canadian and you pick up another passport, whether it's 6 months or 6 years from now, you're going to feel any worse off for it because you'll probably find a lot of other opportunities that come from having that second passport, whether it saves you from tax or not. So this is the wake-up call. This is one of the biggest warning shots I've seen, and that means you need to prepare. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.